Good morning. Mr. Terry was doing this. I don't know. I mean that's the time. Um, I see. Well, it's good to see everyone here for Bible class this morning. Still in Genesis, um, and starting chapter 5 this morning. Last week we got through 32 through 34. In chapter 32 last week we had studied what Jacob did what he could to protect his family in light of Esau possibly coming to harm him. And so he does what he can to protect his family. And that toward the end of that chapter, we see him having an encounter with a spiritual being, most likely an angel, as we discussed it to be, who blessed him eventually. And then in chapter 33, we see Jacob and Esau officially meet again, but Esau is not angry in any sort of way. Their relationship is rekindled, and it's all good. And so they go their separate ways by the end of that chapter. And then in chapter 34 was pretty intense. We saw some inhabitants of the land of Canaan. It was Shechem specifically. He had defiled one of Jacob's daughters, Dinah. And so we see Simeon and Levi, her brothers, go and get vengeance or revenge for her. And so 34 is pretty intense when we studied that. And so now we're at the beginning of chapter 35. Jacob wasn't too happy with their decision to do that, but they said, should we let her, I believe they called her, should we let her act as a harlot for this family that she would be going into? And so they wanted to do their best to protect their sister. And so that happened, chapter 34, and so 35 now. After all that intense things happened, we don't know how much time has passed since then, but now a new, part of Jacob's life is beginning. He gets some instructions from God. God tells him to arise, in verse 1, and go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar there unto God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. And so, what exactly is it that could cause God to specifically tell him to do that at this time? Usually any time we've seen altars been made before throughout Genesis, it was made on the person's own decision to do so. Noah and Abraham and I guess Isaac, they all made altars on their own. But now this is the first time God is specifically telling someone to go and build an altar. And so there's no official reason given. God's just telling him to go do this. It could just be generally to remind him that he is with him at this time, and Jacob still needs to just be focusing on doing his best to be a follower and servant of God. I guess to try and make there be more of a reason, it could be because of the last chapter that happened. He was pretty scared at that time because he was worried that other people of the land they were in would come and try to harm him and his family after Simeon and Levi went and killed all the family of Shechem because of what they did to their sister. And so it could have been because since he was going through a tough time right now, God says, go build this altar for me and get your mind set straight again to be focused on me, if he was being more scared than having more faith in God at this time. And so, however it is for Jacob, it's still a good thing for him to be focused on God in general. And so now God just telling him to go and build this altar for him to be as a monument toward God. And so he says to go to Bethel and do so, where he had already been before when he had built the rocks in a sort of formation and put oil on it when he was running from his brother and then on his way to Haran to get a wife there. And so Jacob is obedient to God, of course. He's instantly getting ready to do what God says here. He says to his family and everyone in his house, in verse 2, to put away the strange gods that are among you. He says, be clean, change your garments, and let us arise and go up to Bethel. I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and who was with me in the way which I went. And so, to this specific spot in Bethel where he had seen this dream of the ladder going from heaven to earth, and he's saying, they needed to go back there to build this altar to God. Apparently, his family had been involved with at least having strange idols in their home, idols that were just inanimate objects. They might have been worshiping them also. Most likely Jacob wasn't a part of it, but at least some people in his family was, maybe various sons or maybe handmaids of his wives or whatnot. But he's saying they need to put those away, whether they were close to them or not, and now, because they were going to get ready to worship the one true God as they were going to go build this altar. And so he doesn't have any part in that. He's telling them to get ready and get clean for this. He's saying to change your garments. That shows the importance of our appearance when we go to worship God and to be in his presence. He wants them to be in a, sort of acceptable manner unto God. So they're getting ready to go and do this. Yes, sir, Mr. Terry.
We don't know exactly how long, if this was actually in chronological order. If it was, right up before that, we see the incident that happened with Diana. What did Jacob's sons do? They went in and took the wives and everything as slaves, and the children as slaves. They brought into the camp these idol worshipers, which infiltrated them into the very community of Jacob.
Yeah.
And we need to think about that today when we associate and we bring in people that are worldly and everything into our very lives, that it's easier for us to be drawn away from God than it is to draw them away from the world.
That's a good point. And I get to add on to that too, I guess, if it is in chronological, this chapter at least order, they had, I guess, like ransacked that city too and taken all the riches and belongings and whatnot. So specific idols could have been a part of that as well. Any other comments so far? In verse 4 here, they're going to Bethel now. We see an obedient family to do what Jacob says here. It says they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand and their earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was by Shechem. And so these earrings apparently had some sort of significance to do with something that was not toward the one true God. In the Truth for Today commentary, they write that the rings were probably part of the valuables that Jacob's sons had taken while sacking Shechem in chapter 34. And so the items may have had a religious significance to those pagan people. And so that could be the case there of why they left behind these earrings specifically. So verse 5, they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were round about them, and they did not pursue after the sons of Jacob. So apparently as they were traveling, people might have wanted to harm them, various inhabitants of Canaan, but God protected them in some sort of way. We don't know exactly what he did, if it was some type of literal protection around them as they were traveling the whole time, or just some type of divine providence that he made possible for the cities not to be so focused on them. But whatever God did, it was to protect Jacob and his family as they were traveling. And so this happens, and then verse 6, it says, Jacob came to Luz, which was in the land of Canaan, that is Bethel, he and all the people that were with him. He built there an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. And so at first, when he first named it, it was just Bethel, and that meant the house of God. But El Bethel means God of the house of God. And so as this happens, he's obeying God here, building this altar for him. Verse 8, Deborah, this is Rebekah's nurse, it says, she had died, and she was buried beneath Bethel under an oak. And the name of it was called, what that word says there, I guess, let me try to pronounce it. Elon Bachith, maybe that's how it says. But this is the first time that Rebekah has been mentioned in quite a while, since she and Isaac had sent away Jacob. we saw this handmaid that was appointed to her when she first went with Abraham's servant to go marry Isaac, but she was never given a name, and so now this is the first time she's named Deborah here. It's a bit of a random thing, in my opinion, to be put here, bit of random information here. I'm not sure the significance of us knowing about this woman, Deborah. The name of where she was buried here, this word, Allon Bachith, it means the oak of weeping. And so that's fitting with what that just happened, this death of Deborah. And so she's buried here, and because she died here, they probably didn't carry her dead body. They didn't want to back all the way home, so they just buried her here where she died. And so Jacob builds this altar to God, and he obeys him here. But then God appears to him again, and it gives him more instructions. Verse 9, he says to him that, or he doesn't say anything to him in verse 9, he says he blessed him. And so we don't know, can be a little confusing, I would say, here, because it says when he appeared to him, when he came out of Padan Aram, and so we don't know the exact time frame of this occurrence, because he had went from Canaan to Bethel, and I believe Bethel, it wasn't exactly halfway to Haran, but it was closer to Haran than it was to Canaan. And so, but it says here, when he came out of Padan Aram, which is another name for Haran. And so I don't know if he went from Bethel to Haran and now was going back home, but I'm assuming it's sometime after Bethel, when he had just built the altar to God. And so whatever time frame this is, he is going on his way home back to Canaan, I believe. But before he does so, God appears to him and blesses him here. And so he says in verse 10, he says, "Thy name is Jacob, thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name." And he called his name Israel. And so this is the second time God has said this to him, that his name will now be Israel. And so I believe, did Mr. Joe had to leave home or go? Okay. We had asked a question last week about what I think significance of this was, saying that even though Jacob's name was changed by God to Israel, people were still calling him Jacob. And he asked, I guess, just what exactly is the significance of it if people weren't calling him Jacob just yet. And so, or people weren't calling him Israel. And so with what I could find on this subject is that when God changed his name, it wasn't for people to just literally start calling him Israel, but more of it was a title appointed to him. And it's not about what his name now was, but what it meant for the kind of person he now was. It was more so the meaning behind it. And so what the meaning behind the name Israel is, it hasn't been universally agreed upon about the actual definition of this name Israel, but a general consensus of people, they agree to it, that it means Prince of God. And so if all of a sudden you have a title that is meaning the Prince of God, people would take notice of that. They may think you have some pretty powerful significance to you as a person. People would see the relationship more between him, his family, and God if they think about what this title Israel means. And so since Jacob was the father of 12 sons who would have many children who would grow the nation of Israel into much more than it was now, people would see that it stems all the way back to Jacob, and then even further than that to Abraham and Isaac. And this whole family, they'd see have more of a spiritual relationship with God. And so people may think in that age, when they see Jacob and people of his family, they can think to themselves that, wow, they come from someone who was called the Prince of God. Not totally that 24/7 to people say like, hey, Israel, or something like that, but more just a title appointed to him. I would equal this, I'd say, to how we all have various names. Like my name's obviously Justin, but when I become baptized, I'm a Christian. It's not, my name isn't changed, but it's the meaning of who I am is now changed, if that makes sense in some sort of way. And so with Jacob's name being changed, it's more of now who he was, not that there was any, people didn't have the command to start calling him Israel. They could still call him Jacob, but Israel and this title meaning Prince of God had an impact on people, other people seeing that. And so they would be able to see that Israel, as they have more descendants, has a relationship with God. They would be a more sanctified nation in the eyes of people. They'd be able to see that. And so hope that all makes sense there. And so God blesses him, and he reiterates this name change here, and he gives him some commands. In verse 11, he says, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. And the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed after thee will I give it, or will I give the land. And so this is a reiteration of his covenant with this family. He had said this to Abraham, he had said this to Isaac, and he had said a part of his covenant with Jacob so far. I believe it was maybe chapter 31 or 32, when he appeared to him. That was a sort of reminder for Jacob to keep serving him, and God would bless him and protect him throughout his life. But now he's specifically telling him the details of his covenant that he's had with his family thus far, that he will continue to bless them, and more specifically, many nations would come from them, and they would all be blessed through him. And so, verse 13, God went up from him in the place where he talked with him, and then Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, even a pillar of stone. And he poured a drink offering thereon, and he poured oil thereon. A similar thing we've seen him do already when he talks to God. And it says here, he called the name of the place where God spake with him Bethel. And so this name has already been applied to a different place where we saw him have that dream. We saw him go back there. But now, in a different location, he's naming it House of God also, Bethel, because he had a specific conversation with God. And so we see him and I guess his family as a whole having more of a relationship with God as this is going on. And so they officially start more going back to Canaan after they have obeyed all these commands to God to build this altar to him. And so after Jacob had this experience with God, in verse 16, it says that they journeyed from Bethel, the second place that they named it, and it says, there was but a little way to come to Ephrath. And Rachel travailed, and when she had hard labor, it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, fear not, thou shalt have this son also. And so the Truth for Today commentary sheds a little bit of light on how this midwife was able to determine this gender before the baby was born here. It says this woman's ability to determine the gender of the baby early in the delivery may mean that the child was a breech birth. And so that's just a little bit more understanding there of how she said it. She said, you'll have this son also before the child was even born. And so as she's having this son, it is a tough labor, it says. It says it came to pass as Rachel's soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoni. And this name means son of sorrow. But his father called him Benjamin. And so that name means son of the right hand. And so it says, Rachel died, and she was buried in the way to Ephrath, which is in Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar upon her grave, and that is the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. And so the people of Moses' time recognized this location that is apparently in Ephrath as a burial place for Rachel all the way years ago. And so something important to note here about Rachel's death is how it says, that's how the scripture says, her soul was in departing, for she died. And so this clearly shows that it's when someone dies is when their soul leaves their body and goes to the spiritual realm of either heaven or hell, the waiting place for there at least. And so that's, I guess, some information there about how death works. When you die, your soul leaves the physical body. So overall, Rachel dies here while giving birth. And so as this all happens within Jacob's family, they're still on their way back to Canaan. Jacob is officially called Israel by someone else now, and that someone being Moses, writing this from future reference. But it says, as Moses writes here, he's saying that Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the Tower of Edar, and this was just a hill in that land. And it says, after this, something unfortunate happens. It came to pass when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben, that's Jacob's first son, he laid with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. And so a obviously sinful act that Reuben just comes out and does here as they're still on their way back to Canaan. Reuben does this inappropriate act. We don't know the official reason for Reuben doing this. There's many opinions on why, whether he was just tempted or whatnot. I remember one commentary said that he was, since Leah had died, since Rachel had died, I saw one commentary say that he was trying to sort of get back at Jacob, I believe, because since in his eyes Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, he might have still been sorrowing after her rather than spending more time with Leah and even his handmaids that he had as wives. And so they said that a custom back then was to sort of show your dominance over someone was to take their wife in this way. I don't know if that's the exact case, but since Leah was Reuben's mother, one commentary did say that he was sort of getting back at Jacob for not loving Leah as much as he loved Rachel. But no matter how you look at this or what conclusion you may come to, it's obviously still a sinful thing that Reuben did here. It was wrong of Reuben and Bilhah to do, as they were of the same family doing this. And so that happens with Reuben, a wrong thing there. And then in these coming verses 22 through 26, we get sort of a recap of Jacob and his family. It says all the names there and who they're the sons of, verses 22 through 26. We've already seen that, and so we know who they are all related to. And so at the end of this chapter, Jacob has all of his children with him. In verse 27, it says, he came unto Isaac his father, unto Mamre, unto the city of Arba, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. And the days of Isaac were 180 years, which is 180 years old. And Isaac gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people, being old and full of days. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. And so Isaac passes away. It's the first time we've seen his name in quite a while. But when Jacob and his family reach back home, however long after that happens, Isaac eventually passes away. And so his only two sons, Jacob and Esau, they bury him. And so here's another confirmation of what the process of death is like. He gave up the ghost when he died here. So that's chapter 35. This is essentially the last chapter we see of the story focused on Jacob specifically. So are there any comments or questions before we move on? Chapter 36 now. This is a chapter of many names here. As we see sort of a close on Jacob's life specifically, we get some closure on what happens with Esau's side of the family. We see some things that happened to him while Jacob was in Haran working for Laban here. This lineage that is throughout this chapter is not necessarily important to remember every single name that's presented here, But what's important to remember about this chapter is about the separate nation that it becomes after Genesis. Esau's descendants that will eventually be the nation of Edom are not out of the picture just yet. And so this chapter shows how they become a large nation themselves, the nation of Edom. And so within this chapter, we see how Esau is still blessed with land, much land by God, even though he was not specifically chosen in the same way that Jacob was. Esau was still blessed with land that was of the area called Seir, and he still had many descendants come from him, just as God specifically told that it would be the case for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Esau is having many descendants also. And so many nations coming from him. And so verse 1, all these generations of Esau are in this chapter, who is Edom. It says Esau is he's the first individual here, and then Edom is the nation that comes from him. And so in verse 2, we see the two original women that he had married in the previous chapter, those two women being Adah and Aholibamah. But then in verse 3, this is the first mention of this third wife here, Bashemath. And so that's three women he has married thus far from the land of Canaan. And then in verses 4 and 5, we see his wives having children of their own with Esau. And then in verse 6, Moses writes that Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all the persons of his house, his cattle, his beasts, all his substance which he had gotten in the land of Canaan, and went into the country from the face of his brother Jacob. And so we don't know whether this was after the first time he had saw Jacob again, or whether it was after his father had died and he was leaving again. But whichever point that is, he is taking everything he has now and just leaving their presence, going back to where he was from, whether it was when he first saw Jacob in the wilderness after so many years, or whether it was when he had first, or after that, when he had buried his father and left. But he had all these riches and many blessings here, and so because of that, he had to leave their presence specifically, because in verse 7, it says their riches, that's Jacob and Esau, were more than that they might dwell together. And it says all the land therein they were strangers, could not bear them because of their cattle. Thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. And so we obviously know Jacob is rich, and Esau is rich also. And so it's hard for them to even live in the same area because they have so many cattle and so many riches. The land that they're in of Canaan can't fit them all. And so obviously Jacob has been told specifically by God, and as well as Isaac and Abraham, to dwell in this land. And so Esau is the one who leaves it and goes towards, it says, Mount Seir. And so Esau leaves to go there. So we see more about Esau's descendants here. Verse 9 through 13, we see some more children he has with Adah and Bashemath. In verse 14, we see some of the sons that he has with Aholibamah and who they have as children. And then in verses 15 and 16, we see this first time of this title of Duke. Before a lot of the names who come from Eliphaz, that's the son of Adah, is Duke put before a lot of these names here. And so the word Duke is another name for chief or captain. And so these people now that are being listed, if they have the name Duke before it, it's various leaders who were a part of the nation of Edom, and however they chose to divide themselves among that nation. And so verses 17 through 19, more dukes that are just various descendants of Esau. And then here, the next few verses 20 through 30, we see various leaders that were a part of the land of Seir before Esau and his family came here. They are a part of a people that are called Horites. And so looking in other passages of the Bible, we see the names, or the same names, of both Horites and Esau's people appearing together. That's in 1 Chronicles 1, starting in verse 38. And that chapter, or it's a book that's full of history. And so in that chapter specifically, Chapter 1, starting in verse 38, we see various names of Esau's descendants and various names of these Horites. And so these people who are Horites of the land of Seir, they were there first, but then when Esau came into the picture, him and all of his family and descendants, when they came into the land, they apparently got together and became one nation together here. And so verses 20 through 30 explains their part of this relationship and how they got into the picture of this nation. And so eventually they will be one whole nation together. So then verses 31 through 39, we see more names, but it's a different topic here. These are now kings of Edom, it says. It says in verse 31 that these are kings that reigned in the land of Edom before here reigned any king over the children of Israel. So Moses is writing about kings. It says before there were even kings of Israel, but this can be a little confusing because at the time Moses is writing this, kings of Israel aren't even a thing yet for him. There were judges before kings, and Moses, he wasn't around for that. So how exactly did he know Israel would have kings? Well, obviously it's been told to Abraham and Jacob that obviously many nations would come out of them, and part of that, God specifically said kings would come from you. And so even though it hasn't happened just yet, official kings coming from Jacob's people will eventually. And so kings now specifically for the nation of Edom are listed in verses 32 through 39 here. And so Moses can write things from, obviously we've seen from a point of view from his time, saying things that haven't happened yet but will happen eventually, and he can also write things that haven't even happened for him yet, because even apart from all that, he's still under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and so he just is essentially writing whatever I suppose he's commanded. However, that works for being inspired by the Holy Spirit to write the Bible. But again, verses 31 through 39, kings of Edom here. And in the end of this chapter, verses 40 through 43, we see just a little bit more of people that come from Esau in various places that the descendants of Esau settled. Each of these names through these 4 verses here were most likely names of people first, but then it says in the last verse there, it says, these are dukes of Edom according to their habitations in the land of their possession. And so these are names of people, but they also end up being names for the land of wherever these specific individuals resigned and settled in. The area of where they lived became named after the people there. And so a lot of information in this chapter about Esau and his family, but that's all of chapter 36 there without getting into the specifics of each individual name. There'll be a lot of names to name. Are there any comments or anything about this chapter? Well, we still have a little bit of time left, but this is a good place to stop, though. Starting in chapter 37 through the end of this book is the now, I guess, sort of last run of Genesis is focused on Joseph, and that's throughout the rest of this book. And so I'll be leaving this Thursday, and so I'll be gone till I think it's April 5th. I'll be gone for my brother's wedding, have the tryout in Alabama, and then the lectureships at the Memphis School of Preaching I'll be going to. And so I'll be gone for a little bit, but when I come back, I guess it'll be on April 7th, I think. We'll start again in chapter 37, and then that'll be the whole picture on Joseph there. So thank you for your attention.